So welcome to this Long Arm Supervision webinar that we planned today. And it is open access to everybody, not only Humber and North Yorkshire region. I am delighted as Hanan. I'm a project manager in LEAP. LEAP stands for Learning Environment Assessment and Placement within Humber and North Yorkshire. A very proud member of a small team that we really like working hard to working together differently and expanding the way that we look at placement across the system. And one of the best initiative that we started is looking at role emerging placement. Humber, North Yorkshire, we developed a LEAP steering group that we initiated the conversations between different universities and organizations and providers, and we are looking at a new initiative to take this region forward. This is what we'd like to be the objectives today, is to value the prospect of role emerging placement, to understand the role of long arm supervision, realize the opportunities that comes with that, and then hopefully establish a long arm supervision interest forum to begin shaping our bank of long arm supervisors. So just to bring up the LEAP objectives for last year, and you probably know that we are extended to another year, 2023-24. And one of the, we were driven by different objectives. One of it is work together differently and looking at the range and number of quality of placement is expanded across the system. And that is like, in a way, it's an outcome, but rather than the process that it takes to us is what's really driving us, because it's all about the quality of placement that we offer within the region. So in the Humber and North Yorkshire strategy, we have an ambition that everyone in our population live longer, healthier lives by narrowing the gap in health life expectancy between the highest and the lowest in our communities by 2030, and increasing the health life expectancy by 5 years into 2024. To reach this ambition, we have a vision to ensure all our people start well, live well, age well, and die well. To deliver this ambition, the intention are to creating the condition to enable and empower our people, communities, and organizations to achieve change. So we need to think person, enabling our people to live healthy, independent, safe lives as long as possible by understanding what matters to them. Think family, as supporting families to enable everyone to be safe and learn and ensure every child has a best start in life. And to think community, an all-inclusive community approach to ensure that the next generation are healthier than the last and have the opportunity to thrive. So the health and social contexts are rapidly changing in England. Government drives towards well-being, health promotion, reducing inequalities, sustainability, active aging, and integrating services, primary and community services. This means an increased move of our health and social away from medical-orientated organization and towards community-based, co-ordinated, independent, and voluntary services that focus on health promotion, well-being, and function. This change means that our students must and also develop knowledge and skills and confidence to work in these key areas in order to remain viable for the future professions. So in the past few months, we co-produced and co-designed and started implementation of role emerging placements across the system and across multi-health and care programs, including physio, dietetics, learning disability and mental health nurses, OTs. And this co-production and co-designing is not just a word, it's not just a concept, it's an enriching process, meeting of the minds, coming together to find solution. In practice, co-production involves people being consulted, included, and working together from start to the end for a project that affects them. And when we co-produce work best, co-production works best when people in partnership come and value each other as equal, sharing the power and having influence on decisions. What we want is the long arm supervision model has and will re-establish students' opportunities to undertake innovative placement extending beyond the NHS, with promise which should promote vital alternative skills set across diverse cultural and situational background. This partnership will work with Humber North Yorkshire Intermediate Care Partnership, primary care, community, local, voluntary, charity, educational providers, and higher education institutes to encourage and develop and the implementation of innovative evidence-based solutions that supports delivery of our ambition and vision. So I'm inviting you onto this journey today. And now, with no further ado, here is our special guest speakers, Fiona and Miranda, who are both senior lecturers at York St. John University. I'll let them introduce themselves and looking forward to what they have prepared to share with us today.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's absolutely incredible to see how many people are here today. And for me, I feel kind of really overwhelmed by it because introducing myself, anyone who knows me knows that I live and breathe role emerging placements and set them up when I used to work at Leeds 18 years ago, and where we had all our students, our occupational therapy students, all going a role emerging placement as a mandatory placement 18 years ago. And today I'm absolutely amazed, but it has caught on finally after 18 years. And so I'm going to share some of my experience of overseeing these placements, setting them up, long arm supervisory models, and I'm hoping that you will also get the excitement bug for this type of placement, which I have to say, it's going to be hopefully my PhD will end up being all about role emerging placements and placement models. So that's a little bit about who I am. Fiona?
So I'm Fiona Howlett. I'm the Senior Lecturer in Occupational Therapy as well at York St John University, and I'm the Professional Practice Placement Lead for the Masters and BSc programmes at York St John. And yes, I've been doing role emerging placements for some time, but I'm delighted to have you all on board, and I hope we share some of our passion and enthusiasm for what we do.
Okay, so what we thought would be useful is to give an overview of the types of models of placements that have been successfully, the students have been successful on, but also they've learned a lot from. And what I'd like to ask you to do, and I know Hanan's going to be on standby to capture this, is if you have some burning questions, please put them into the chat for us, so that if there's something that we haven't particularly answered, I might glance at it, or Fiona might glance at it, we might be able to answer it or put it into our prepared slide show today, or we will definitely be formulating an answer for you when we go to the question and answer section. We also are very happy to have here at the moment, we have students from York St John who are currently on a role emerging practice placement. Emily's on camera at the moment, aren't you, Emily? Give us a little wave. Okay, there she is. Okay, and I wonder, Hanan, if you could enable Emma, I think Emma Moore is here, who is an occupational therapist who has been on a role emerging placements a few years ago, and allow her to say how it changed her practice and how it's formulated and informed her practice to date. I don't know whether Emma, you can come on camera just to show your face so that I can see that you're there. There she is. Hi, Emma. And I wonder if Julia is there as well. Julia, are you there? If you would also come on camera. Because we will, myself and Fiona will be, oh, someone's putting their hand up, probably need to be enabled maybe. Just basically our alumni and also alumni students, but also current students, because we will be asking and going, sort of putting, if you like, getting their flavour on what it's like to be on placement. Hello, Julia, I can see you now. Hi, Julia. So, because it's not, so as an educator, all I really want is the best possible learning opportunity for students, as obviously all of us do. But it's from the students' mouths themselves that I think it would speak loudest as to what they've gained and how it's shaped their practice. So we will be doing that. And so please do put your comments and put your chat messages in. But then ultimately, one of the reasons why the role emerging placements were set up was because there seemed to be this gap between what the students were learning in theory about the ideal way to practice, and then what they were seeing on placement was sometimes the resources were just not allowing people to be able to fulfill the full scope and range of their skills. And so role emerging placements came out of a kind of almost situation where we wanted to be able to use real life scenarios or real life experience of some of the sort of up-to-date theories in practice. But also what was happening is, of course, that the roles, all of our roles, as Hanan's expertly explained, is that there's this move towards self-management, people being more responsible for their own healthcare and being more able to look after themselves to prevent perhaps some conditions from manifesting themselves as acute conditions, which then cost obviously an awful lot of money to have to remediate. So ultimately, role emerging placements have proven to be successful in creating new posts in areas where there was never that profession in that setting before, as either health promotion or in terms of helping people to self-manage conditions at home in the community. But it's also proven successful in acute settings, and we'll use some examples of how a role emerging placement doesn't just, if you like, bring the profession to life in a perhaps a setting where it's been diminished because of resource implications. It allows our students to see what potentially the role could be if we had an ideal healthcare system, which sadly we all must admit we haven't because of resources. So the students then can see the reality of practice for sure, but then they can also see the potential of practice. So, and that allows a student to really apply some of those theories that they're being pushed to obviously understand and the evidence base out there. So that's the reason why role emerging placements were originally set up around sort of 20 years ago. Okay, so next slide, please. So the different models of placement have to be understood in order to appreciate what is long arm supervision and what is a role emerging placement. So the first type of model is a typical model for occupational therapists is in a one-to-one apprentice style model, which is where you have one supervisor, one student, and I'll go into depth about what this is in a minute. But basically, that's a traditional placement in a traditional setting. That's a placement we've all learned from ourselves. And that sometimes can be one of the barriers to long arm supervision is if you haven't been supervised via a long arm supervisor before, sometimes it feels alien or it feels that can't be real supervision. So just to bear in mind the way that you were perhaps trained is changing and is changing in the future. The multiple mentoring may well be something that particularly nursing and other professions is very much more used to, which is where you would have a if you like, a student or two students in a setting, and they are mentored and supervised in their practice by multiple of people in that team. Maybe one person's giving them their feedback in terms of their progress, but on the whole, it is a joint effort. It's a team supervision role. The role emerging placements and the project-based placements are very different from those two scenarios. It's where you don't have a professional of the profession in situ where the students are placed, and they have to demonstrate the value of their profession through a project, and I'll talk about that in a bit more depth in a moment. So development placements are where there may be an occupational therapist or physiotherapist or nurse in situ, but they haven't got the opportunity to develop a service development, and they want to have a service development opportunity, and so they set the students to carry out that project under their supervision. And then there's peer assisted placements where you have students supporting other students or students supporting one another whilst they're on placement together. Okay, next slide, please. So the apprentice model is very much about you've got your expert and the student has to obviously copy the practice of that expert, because how else can they learn other than through the expert who's had years of experience, knows what they're doing, and they can make sure the student is on the right lines. This is something that we've all probably experienced in our education, of course. It's a fantastic model, tried and tested. The apprentice style model is something that is particularly important when you're learning hands-on skills and you get an opportunity to observe it first, observe it and then do a little bit of it. Then gradually that support is withdrawn as you start to stand on your own 2 feet. The only problem with an apprentice model is that sometimes it's onerous because you've got to have a person watching the students. So in order for the student to practice on the patient, they have to have the observer there, and that's time consuming, and it's been found in research it's time consuming model. It also tends to, the student becomes dependent on the expert rather than use their own clinical reasoning skills or their own rationale, or they may well have come from a background as a support worker, and they may be on placement in a familiar environment, but they're not allowed to use their own initiative because they're under the direction of their supervisor or their mentor. Ultimately, what can happen is as well, if that mentor has not had the chance to be up to date with the evidence-based practice, sometimes there's new and innovative ways of doing things that they've just not had a chance to learn about. And yet the student may know about it. And for example, an assessment tool, let's use that as an example. The student will know about that because they're taught about the latest innovations in evidence-based practice. And so what happens in the apprentice model is often the student is disempowered from bringing something to the table. So they're always having to be fed by the apprentice as apprentice. And that assumes the student knows nothing. And we know we can learn a lot from our students. So we've got to open up the opportunity for students to be able to have a voice, have a say, and to be able to bring something to the table to offer. And then it's not so exhausting for the educator. So there is evidence that the apprentice model is suitable as a learning experience, of course, but is it always the de facto model for every type of setting? And what basically the evidence is saying is that it's not the most suitable model for every single setting. Okay, go to the next slide, please. So ultimately, service development placements are the next best thing, if you like. So you've still got your traditional placement, you've got the expert in situ, and they may say to the student, okay, so I've observed you doing these assessments. Now I'd like you to go away and develop an assessment tool for our service that is better than the one you've observed us doing. And I'm just using this as an example because actually this actually happened. So I'm just using this as an example. And the students go off and spend some time away from the setting, developing the project, looking at the evidence base, looking at some case scenarios to how this assessment strategy would be put into place. And then they do some training of staff. And that's their service development project whilst they're on placement. Now that's something that is within situ with experts, and it's just for that setting. It doesn't bring anything necessarily new, brand new and innovative. And also the student isn't having as much of a voice perhaps that they could do, but it is a development, a different type of placement. They do some hours face-to-face with supervision, and they do some service development as well. Okay, so next slide. These actually have, there's some examples of them here. They've basically done assessment tools, as I said. They've done a weekend plan for patients on acute mental health inpatient ward to help them be meaningfully engaged. And they developed an extension for the role of an occupational therapist in an eating disorders team. All of these, though, were made possible after a role emerging placement experience. So these were their final placements. So the students had already got the experience of service development given to them by the role emerging placement. Now, it doesn't mean to say they have to have had that, but these examples followed on from a role emerging placement in a traditional setting. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Project-based placements are the role emerging placements, essentially, and that's what we're talking about. This is where the project, the students basically, if you like, has to come up with an idea as to what would benefit the setting from their own fresh pair of eyes going into a setting such as a charity. Okay, and we're going to talk about different settings in a moment, but different charities or whatever. And it's usually 2 students or more. You can have 3 students. And what they do is they go into the setting full time. They spend time with the service users or the volunteers. They spend time with the staff. They spend time in the setting. And from that, they pick up the needs that perhaps aren't being met through the profession. So the profession of occupational therapy or physiotherapy or speech and language or nursing, whatever profession it is, bring their professional goggles, if you like, into that setting to see, oh, you know, they could really benefit from this. If an OT or a physio or a nurse were here, we could be doing that. And they present an idea to the setting saying, this is what we think you might benefit from. What say you? So it comes from the student. It is role emerging. It is coming from the student. It isn't given to them by the setting. And that's what makes the project so exciting, because the setting gets a fresh new pair of eyes. The students get to have a voice and an opinion, and they're leading this from the outset. But they have to stay in the scope of practice. And that's where the long arm supervisor's role kicks in. Next slide, please. Am I going okay with this? So please tell me if I'm talking too fast, get too excited. Okay. They're much better doing this with peer support. So they're much better, much more effective, feel much more supported. The research that we've done have found that students feel better in a role emerging placement when they're placed with 2 or more students. Okay, simply because they can be left, you know, in a setting and you know the staff are very busy and they've got their peer with them to be discussing the project idea. They can bounce the idea off. They can divide different elements of the project to work on. Okay, next slide, please. So a role emerging placement is essentially where you put 2 or more students into an emerging setting or a setting where there's no element of that profession in situ. So it's a setting that normally you wouldn't have a physiotherapist, you know, dietitian, a nurse, you know, whatever profession it is, you wouldn't normally have them in that setting. And they then bring that professional lens and illuminate what they could offer, the profession could offer to that setting. And they do that with the support of their long arm supervision, long arm supervisor. Okay, next slide, please. So how does it compare to a traditional placement? The role emerging, there's no professional in situ. Long arm professional supervision is to more than one student, but they don't see them every day. So just to remind you, could be working anywhere because you're not meeting in the same way. I'll explain the role of this long arm supervisor role in a moment. There's growth in the professional role from the role emerging placement. You can see how, and in fact what's happened, and there's lots of examples of where new posts have been created on the back of a role emerging placement. The students take the leadership role, and so they get a lot back from it. Plus, the educators, both educators, the one in the setting who's the expert, so it might be a charity worker, or it could be, you know, there's different settings that you've got. It could be someone who's a health support worker or a social worker, whatever role is in the setting. They basically simply make sure the students, look out for students' health and safety, make sure the students are attending, make sure the students' well-being is maintained. They support with students in a project idea, and we'll talk about the roles in a moment, but ultimately they are not there to provide the student with observed practice. That's not what they're there to do. They're not there to shadow the person in the setting. They are there to work on a project. Traditional placement, you've got the professional in situ. The student learns from the professional. It's usually 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. The student learns condition-specific skills, and the student is an apprentice learner. Obviously, there's no growth, new potential role there because they are in that apprentice role, and they learn slowly by observing and developing the same skills as the expert in that setting. Next slide, please. So how does it work? It has to be a blended learning strategy. So the students have to have some time away from the setting to work on the project. They can either work in the setting if there's suitable space to do that, or they can come to the university and work in the university, or they can work online like a lot of us are. Okay, but it is not expected that the student has to clock in and clock out like they would do on a traditional placement, and that's a given. They have to be given time to develop their project. This allows them to develop their clinical reasoning skills, allows them to bring the evidence into the project, so they've got time to go and look at the relevant evidence and bring that to the project. Okay, next slide, please. Why do we do it? Why the role emerging placement is being pushed by the government? It's because there's been growth and expansion of professional roles. It's been found to increase practice capacity. So we know we need to get more students graduating. We need to fill those empty posts that are sitting there in the NHS. And this is one way to do it. There's always a shortage of placements. And this allows us to be able to give real life experience to students, which is of value to them and their practice. Next slide, please. And I think I'm going to hand over now to Fiona, because she could talk also about some of the benefits to the rep settings. And when we come and talk about the benefits to the students, that's when we're obviously going to be handing over to our fantastic students. Is that okay, Fiona?
Yeah, it's fine, thank you. Okay, so there are lots of benefits to a role emerging placement, to the setting as well. The students contribute to a multidisciplinary approach. They might look at things from a completely different angle to the staff that are currently in situ. They also bring an occupational perspective. They're very much looking at what people want and need to be able to do. There's massive benefits to the service users and to the service as well, where they've got somebody different coming in, having a look at what's happening and maybe just asking a few different questions about why things are happening. Why do you do it that way? Could you think of doing it an alternative way? And there's an increased awareness of whichever profession. I know it says occupational therapy on there, but it could be any profession. So there's an increased awareness of those professions that are working in the role emerging placement. Can we have the next slide, please? So long arm supervision. So long arm supervision is from an external person. So it doesn't have to be an OT, it could be an external physio, it could be an external nurse, whichever profession they're from. And it's not a common feature in traditional practice placements, but it's perfectly acceptable because there's no requirement for that person that's supervising the student to be on site. And for some of you, that might seem really alien, but actually there is no requirement for the person to be there. It's more of a coaching style of supervision versus mentor, really. It requires the students to stay within their scope of practice because they are also governed by the HCPC as well, whilst meeting the needs of the service users. So there's no requirement for that on-site, for that the long arm supervisor to be on site. We currently have a role emerging supervisor who's in Norway, who's supervising some of our students who are in Leeds. Do you want to go on to the next slide, please? So what are the different roles then? Quite confusing with the language, and I'm sure you all have different names for different people who are involved in providing supervision to the students. So there's an on-site mentor. That's the person who the students meet with regularly, more on an operational level. It may be a project leader, it might be a special educational needs coordinator. It really does depend on the setting that the person's in. So every student who goes on a role emerging placement needs to have an on-site mentor who they can come to for day-to-day issues. Then there's an off-site practice educator, or also known as a long arm supervisor. This is the person who meets with the students at least once per week formally for supervision, but often I'm a long arm supervisor at the moment, and I'm sure Emily will tell you that I'm on hand if they've got any queries, or we might have a Teams exchange via chat or a WhatsApp message. So we regularly check in, but formal supervision is once per week. The students negotiate the project with the on-site mentor and with agreement from the off-site long arm supervisors. So the students' remit is to do a project whilst they're on placement. So it is a negotiated project, and I'm sure Emily will discuss that, or Julie will discuss the challenges of that. The off-site educator is therefore responsible for offering support and encouragement, is there to help bounce ideas from initially and to help ensure that the project's professionally focused. There's lots of ethical dilemmas in role emerging placements, and the educator very much, the off-site educator is very much there to help with those ethical challenges as well. The off-site practice educator will write the placement report. Ultimately, it's their professional opinion as to whether the student has passed the placement. But they will liaise with the mentor as well to ensure that their comments are involved in the report as well. So there is feedback from the on-site educator as well. Okay, can you go on to the next slide, please? So roles and responsibilities of the off-site educator. So that's to liaise and support the on-site mentor, to challenge the student regarding the role of whichever profession they're in. They also have professional accountability. They should promote clinical reasoning and encourage the students to reflect on the practice. They also provide a role model for the profession, whichever one that is. They also signpost resources and learning opportunities to enable the student to meet the learning outcomes, to think a little bit wider, to think outside the box sometimes. And it's also the role of the off-site educator to make sure that they meet the learning outcomes for the module that they're actually on. They're also there to assist students in their role and the development of that role, and also ensure opportunity for informal supervision and 1 hour of formal dedicated supervision per week. Okay. So we've got a variety of settings. We just thought we'd give you some examples. These are not exhaustive. There's lots and lots. So Miranda, I'm just looking at, I'll just talk about the ones I know, and then Miranda, I'll let you come in there. So we have a number of students who are on placements in therapeutic farms with people who might have a learning disability or mental health need, and they go there on a regular basis each week. We also have students who are in mainstream schools, primary and secondary. We also had a placement in Leeds Conservatoire, which is a performing arts university, and we had a real emerging placement there, and they actually took the student on afterwards and is now working there full time. Do you want to come in on the rest of it, Miranda?
So you'll notice that actually there are some NHS role emerging placements there. So the community cardiac rehab team had historically never had occupational therapists. So there was just a part-time physiotherapist, and the rest of the clinics were run by were cardio nursing team, which was fine, brilliant, but they were finding that people were not sticking to lifestyle changes and modifications which led up to their cardiac event. And so the occupational therapy students devised fatigue management. They've devised strategies to get people more engaged in their occupations of life, and basically took on and provide a resource pack for the nurses to use within their follow-up clinics. This basically was so successful that they created a Band 6 occupational therapist post full-time on the back of a Royal Emerging Placement. The domestic violence service, this was a placement that took place during COVID. All of the placements had to go online. Lots of the services went online, including the domestic violence service had to go online. This meant that quite a few people were at significant risk, and it was very stressful. And what the students found is obviously they couldn't access the service users themselves, but the staff were getting vicarious trauma from having to deal with such levels of violence within the setting they were working in, and the frustrations of obviously being in lockdown and not being able to provide the same kind of face-to-face support that they used to be able to provide. And this meant that the students actually developed almost like an occupational health, but much more of a well-being based on occupational balance, fatigue and stress management strategies to help people overcome this vicarious trauma they were experiencing. Same with community matrons. There was an awful lot of issues that were being faced in terms of people engaging in self-management of chronic conditions. And what was happening is that people were not getting involved. They were becoming more and more isolated, staying at home more and more and more, and their conditions were actually deteriorating rather than being managed at all. And so the occupational therapy students came up with a strategy to help the community matrons to get people back doing things. Whilst they're doing things, they're exercising. Whilst they're doing things, they're socializing. While they're doing things for themselves, they're being independent. And they produced a resource pack. And again, that generated a post in occupational therapy. About stress, national charity for veterans who are experiencing anxiety and depression. And they came up with a vocational rehabilitation strategy to get people who had been very traumatized within the armed services to actually do some voluntary work, and linked combat stress with volunteer groups to actually give them a purposeful role in the community. So that just gives you an idea. And the one that I'm still involved in myself as well is the development, and we're just writing it up as a research paper, is development of a peer support group for people with type 2 diabetes. Okay, next slide. And this just gives you some idea of some of the projects These are just some examples, and they're there for if people are interested. So the students have to come up with the project idea, but it's in conjunction with other people. So next slide, please. I've done quite a bit of research actually on the benefits for students, and I've just had a paper accepted to compare a role emerging placement in student outcomes, learning outcomes, compared to a role emerging placement. So what particular skills did the students develop in comparison between a traditional and a role emerging placement? And that's going to be published hopefully in the next few months. What I did find was that students seem to develop more service development type, obviously leadership type skills, but that those weren't necessarily being assessed for in the students' practice, which is something that I think the NHS pushing now, is that students should be showing some service development and leadership skills. So what it definitely demonstrated is there's no lack of learning of the professional skills from a role emerging placement, not at all. When that section of the skills were measured, they were just, in fact, they seem to be doing exceptionally well in role emerging placements. And I think the fear and the anxiety is more out of not knowing or the unknown than it is actually about it being in practice. What students certainly feel is that they feel liberated from a medical model, which can sometimes be in a situation where particularly for occupational therapists, they're being told what to do, when in fact they're thinking, well, that isn't necessarily the best strategy for this particular patient, but it's because other people around them are telling them, no, we need you to do this, it's for the benefit of our organization, rather than actually is that in the client's best interests. And so what they were finding is that they could be liberated from that. Next slide, please, because I've got some research to share, and then we'll go over to the floor. What they certainly feel is that they feel more autonomous and confident. They often start in that unconscious incompetency feeling, which Benna talks about, I'm sure you're all aware of, which is basically that element of they don't know anything about anything, and they feel very, very anxious about that. And I would like to remind you about your first day in clinical practice as a freshling professional. You know that feeling, you feel like you know nothing. You've just spent all these years training and you still feel like you know nothing. So you can imagine that for a student, and they've got to somehow prove to you that they're worth their salt within a few weeks. So that feeling is really quite dramatic for students on their first, second, even third and fourth placements, because they're going to placement after placement, different speciality after different speciality. They're not necessarily being able to apply some of the skills they've learned from one setting to another. But the role emerging, because it's not condition focused, it is very much looking at the needs more generally. What's happening is it's using the profession's skills and problem solving through the profession's skills. It's giving them those skills that they can transfer into another setting. Students find that they can match theory to practice more in a role emerging placement, and it teaches them that ability to be able to make a difference more emphatically. And if you want to go to the next slide, and then we'll be handing it over to the floor. I did a mixed method study, 2018, it was published. What I found was an anonymous survey, very small survey, sadly. But what we did find in the survey is that the learning from the role emerging placement and how relevant it was, most of them went to NHS traditional placement, traditional practice on qualification. And what they found is that what they learnt from it, they definitely learnt an awful lot. Whether it's relevant, yes, it was, definitely, or somewhat. What was no evidence was that it was a complete waste of time at all, and that it wasn't relevant to their current practice, which was in fact either in traditional, mainly in traditional. I then did a qualitative thematic analysis and interviewed 6 people. Let's go to the next slide, please. And what this basically found was 3 distinct themes. One is that they cut the role emerging placement or long arm supervisory type of placement, service development placement, supports the traditional learning. So they go hand in hand, tandem, if you like. They work well together. They allow the student to practice skills they've learned from another setting, or they allow practice skills they've theorized about without having the constraints of a particular setting. The next slide, please, because it talks a little bit more in depth. There is an inward and an outward effect, and the inward effect is that it develops your skills. And these are some of the actual quotes taken from the research paper that was published. So it gives you a blank canvas, the freedom to find a gap and find the solution to that gap, and in this case it was through occupational therapy. It was about, without the traditional framework of supervision, it almost forced you to develop skills in being resourceful and look for guidance from other sources and in other ways, rather than just relying on your supervisor. And I needed my rep experience to demonstrate I could develop services. My 3 years of traditional post didn't give me that opportunity. And I was added, and someone said I was added value. That was what I saw myself as. So what we found is that actually students who had had a role emerging placement, they got a job above and beyond those who didn't. And the reason for that is they add an extra dimension because they could talk about project, they can bring those service development leadership skills to the interview and show them off, basically. And so guess what? They tend, because they've got something extra that other students don't have, they tended to get offered the job, sometimes above and beyond that of someone who's been in post for a year. And this was what the research is saying about students. They offer something extra to the clinical setting. Okay, next slide in, please. Whether they felt it was beneficial, yes, it was. Sorry, next slide, please. And would they choose to work in a repping setting in future? Well, not a resounding yay, but only one person said no. So it wasn't very many that said no. Most said that they would, which I know is a bit of a relief for me. It was an anonymous survey and I was thinking, oh God. But no one said definitely not. And only one person said, I don't think so. Okay, next slide, please. What it did do was teach me a thing or two, because I was helping to support a couple of students on a placement with a GP practice, and they were talking about social prescribing. I'd not really heard of social prescribing before, fascinated by it. The students told me what social prescribing was all about, and this was quite a few years ago. And so because I happened to be at the Royal College of Occupational Therapists on their Learning Development Board, I brought that to the fore there. And so the students then informed via myself basically the Royal College of Occupational Therapists, who then very swiftly took a lead on that. And now it's social prescribing, of course, is on all our agendas. And it's nice to have written about that as an opinion piece in the British Journal of Occupational Therapy, the first time that we'd ever done, and that occupational therapy had been associated with social prescribing, at least in published. So that shows you how the students taught us at the university, let alone the other way around. Okay, so next slide, please. And that's it. So as you can see there, we've hopefully enlightened you. I hope. I don't know if we have or not, but I'm sure you must have some questions. And it's over to you, Hannah.
Thank you very much, Merinda. Thank you very much, Fiona, for such an inspiring roles and how it made a difference in the committees and in the roles. It's amazing, the examples and you know how it has accomplished.
So sorry, I'm really sorry. I forgot to say to the students, I wonder if they wouldn't mind talking a little bit about their experience.
Yes, so I'd like to invite current and past students, well, talking about students, but they're like senior professions now, to come and share their experiences. I'll let you decide how you want to go with that, really, between Emma, Emily, and Julia.
So Emma has to go soon. So Emma, are you able to come on camera and onto?
Yeah, she's on.
She's right. So Emma, if you wouldn't mind telling, if you wouldn't mind having a little, just explain to the group a little bit about your experience of role emerging placement and how it shaped your career and what you do now.
Yeah, of course. So I completed my role emerging placement in a homeless setting. So we created a virtual resource pack and a wellbeing assessment pack for individuals to complete. So basically we completed our role emerging placement during the COVID days, not that it's gone away, however, it was very much prevalent there. So we actually did ours with long arm supervision. So that in itself had challenges. One of the main challenges were the fact that obviously we wanted to meet individuals to understand what service user needs were. So we had to adapt our ways of learning to be able to identify that and work together collaboratively alongside a long arm supervisor. And there was 3 of us together working on our projects. So with that, I found the role emerging placement really supported me in enhancing my clinical reasoning skills and really applying theory to practice. Now, at first, I felt so overwhelmed and thought to myself, I don't really know how I'm going to find this role emerging placement, as I'm sure everybody else feels the same. But actually, it enabled me to develop my confidence, both on a personal level and on a professional level. And really thinking about that elevator pitch and selling our services. So understanding how to deliver an occupational perspective to people that weren't really familiar with the occupational therapy role. Most importantly for me, it enabled me to be innovative. And I've really developed a passion for this and service development. In working with a wide diverse of client groups, basically. And as we're aware, every setting has their own professional backgrounds. So for me, I wanted to really enhance the scope of occupational therapy. So where I am working now, what role emerging placement did was offered me a unique selling point, so that when I was applying for a position, amongst others that had come from different backgrounds, I was able to really sell my innovative skills, thinking about what is it that I've done within my role emerging placement that can then transfer them skills into practice. And I think this is what made me stand out. So basically where I am now, I'm working in private practice on inpatients, mainly within orthopedics. However, within 10 months, I've been in the service, I've been able to step up the ladder quite quickly in terms of banding. So I was promoted to a band 6 occupational therapist. And again, I think the things that really stood out was I was able to identify gaps in service and really took the opportunity and confidence to build on this. Within that, I won the Patient Choice Award as well within 12 months. And within the Circle Health Group who I work for, there's actually only 3 settings that have occupational therapy within them. So to win that award on an international basis was amazing. So I feel really proud of that. But again, all this I feel falls back to the role emerging placements. I'm currently in the process of putting together a project bid with the executive director to push for some wellbeing gardens. So again, all this links in with role emerging placements and being able to have them skills to looking at stakeholders, what can they invest. And again, with all this, I need confidence. And I think it's really helped me to get where I am today. And going forward, I'm also in the process of setting up my private practice. So looking at utilising all my skills and embedding theory into practice. So like within the hospital setting, it can be quite institutionalised, and I don't want to lose my skills from experience that I've had within mental health. So I want to sort of expand my skills in different areas. So I have my fingers in lots of pies. However, it's all thank you to Miranda for creating the opportunities and giving me the confidence to do it, really, as part of a role emerging placement. So that is a little bit about my story. Thank you for listening.
Well done, Emma. Such an inspiration.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask me with regards to anything?
I can't see any more so far, but we can keep an eye for you. And if you have to, I know you had to leave in 4 minutes, you're leaving, so we can post it to you and connect with people if they're desperate to listen more about your.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma, for joining us.
Thank you, Emma. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so I wonder if Emily could join us next. Emily's currently on a role emerging placement, and Emily, would you like to tell us what sort of area you're working in and what sort of project you're doing and how you're engaging with the students that you're working with?
Yeah, so as Fiona said, I'm Emily. I'm currently on the Masters programme at York St John and doing my role emerging placement at the minute. So me and another student from our cohort are in a mainstream primary school in Hull. So it's about a 10-week placement, and so background to the school. So it's a mainstream primary school, but there's a hub provision where it's some more of the pupils that need one-on-one support, and they're in there full time. And so a lot of the pupils there are neurodiverse, and so the teachers they're really wanting to have like an outside perspective on how they can make that classroom environment, suitable for all the needs for the pupils there. So the project that we've been working on is, we've been really trying to collaborate with not only with the teachers and the parents and the young people as well, but hearing from other perspectives. So we've been trying to work on how we can make sure that classroom environment is, sensory friendly and ensuring that it enables all the children there to thrive. So I've been putting through some strategies on how we can make adaptations to the classroom and providing more structure, and also build on the things that are like the teachers already have in place. And it's really about having that strengths-based approach about how we can work on what's already put in place and build on that, and also learn from the teachers that are in the school, and they know it from their perspective, and it's really good to enhance my knowledge through them. But as a role emerging placement, like, it's been really great to have that long arm supervision and actually have that like guidance on how you can, so with us, implement like the OT process, and how it would also makes you think like, oh, why am I going to do this, and why am I doing it in that way, and sort of reflecting on it. And it really enables you to have that more autonomy and think about things a lot deeper. And so I've really enjoyed just having that chance to develop things, and really that creativity of how I can, what I want, things that I want to be put in place, rather than being told, oh, it needs to be done this way. It's like, okay, what ideas do I have that I've developed through my experience at university, my other placements, and actually how can I implement my own creativity and use my initiative. And that's really like enhanced on a role emerging placement. And yeah, I think that like overall, there's obviously the way that health and social care is going, and actually if we can break down these boundaries of what like practice is typically, and actually this starts with having the opportunity to do role emerging placements. And so obviously it's only enabled by having long arm supervisors and sharing that expertise and things like that. So yeah, I think it's been a really positive experience. It's really enabled me to see how I can go in the future with the different possibilities and not be put in that box, I guess, of where practice is. So yeah, that's, I guess, a really quick overview of my experience so far.
Thank you, Emily. I wonder if we should just ask Julia, and then maybe we could ask you both questions. Would that be easier, Hannah? I think so. Julia's in a different setting, but on the similar placement. So just explain.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm also on the OT Masters course that Emily is on. So I'm based in a homeless organisation in York. It provides a breakfast service to people in need who are in the York area, and it's got one manager who sort of oversees the service, and also a number of volunteers who work to serve the breakfast every morning. And in the afternoon they have a sort of drop-in session between 1 and 3 where people can come in for a hot cup of tea and a biscuit. And it's really a centre for a lot of people, a lot of the rough sleepers, a lot of people in the hostels in the York area. We've really, I'm there with another person in our cohort, and we've really been given the sort of freedom to do whatever we can do there, which has been brilliant. So over the weeks that we've been there, we've been getting to know the service users, and we kind of recognised that their basic needs were being met at the centre. They were able to get food, hot food, a hot drink, have a shower, get clothing there, which is all fantastic. But there weren't any sort of leisure occupations or activities for them. So we started to think about that a little bit more, and through getting to know them, we were able to sort of devise a programme of activities that they wanted to do, which was really important to them. So we've been making pizzas, we've been making Mother's Day's cards, we've been doing Play-Doh, pinch pots, and this all sort of came through them, what they wanted to do. So the uptake has been really good. And alongside all of that, we've also recognised that a lot of them want to work or want to be employed, but there's many different barriers to getting to that point. So we thought about how can we help with building sort of steps along the way to being employed or working or volunteering, whatever it might be. So there seemed to be a sort of lot of knowledge about cars and an interest in cars from the service users. So we thought maybe something like a bike repair shop could really work in the service. They also, the manager was also asking for more public sort of awareness of what CareSent was doing in York, because in the homeless community, it's like the place to go to, that they know where they'll be taken care of. But public awareness, you go and ask the shop down the road where CareSent is and they wouldn't know. So that was a really important part of our project. So the concept of the bike repair shop is that the general public will be able to bring their bikes there and get them serviced and fixed up. It'll be a brilliant opportunity for the people at CareSent. And we're going to do we're working alongside another bike shop for them to learn basic skills in repairing bikes. So yeah, that's the overall project that we're focusing on, but we're doing lots of different activities along the way. And yeah, we're really enjoying the role emerging process. And we've got a Long Arm supervisor in Norway, which is great, which we meet up with him on a weekly basis as an individual or with with the other OT student, and he's been really supportive. So yeah, it's been a great experience so far.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you very much, Emily. So eye-opener, isn't it? The creativity and just thinking out of the box is just to enable the brain to go everywhere and anywhere. Thank you. I'll keep an eye on the chat for any questions, but we've got already some queries that came to our inbox. So if you don't mind, I can just maybe ask you about them, if that's okay, Miranda and Fiona. So we've got some registered staff and professionals who are interested in role emerging placement and offering long arm supervision, but they are unsure about their responsibilities and accountability. And if anything went wrong, so that concerns them to say oh, can't really, because they're thinking about maybe offering it beyond their working hours. So just supervising students as in their own time, but just concerns around this accountability and responsibilities. What would your thoughts be?
Okay, I'll answer that one. So ultimately, the students, their day-to-day health and safety is obviously overseen by the on-site supervisor, the on-site mentor. They become a member of their team, a member of their staff team, whether they're charity volunteers, whatever it is, and they fall under the accountability for the day-to-day in that area. So so that's number one factor. The long arm supervisor's role is to make sure that students stay within the scope of practice, and that fits with the standards that we are all having to adhere to in order for us to be registered professionals. So in the case of occupational therapy, it's HCPC, as many professionals are. Now, ultimately there, if a student against your recommendation suddenly decides to do some therapy with the patient or a charity service user, and you have said no, you stay with the project, and the student goes ahead and does it anyway, or does something that's not professional at all, they would have to be accountable as a student on a HCPC registered program. Every student that goes into the university has to go under them, falls under the umbrella of the registrant, the professional body. So they fall under that. So the student, if they did something outside their scope of practice and it was not told to do so by their educator, of course it wouldn't be by their professional educator, their long arm supervisor, then the student obviously will be have to face the consequences of that and have to come back to university and face a panel that would basically find whether they committed some form of professional misconduct. That is what we have to do at the university to ensure that our students are staying within the HCPC or within our professional boundaries. So they would obviously, if they did something you thought was in their best interest to do, and then something happens, that's a different scenario. But that would be like you doing something with a student, just as the same way as if you were in any setting at all, it's the same scenario. That if you're doing it, if you want to become a private practitioner and you want to go and do some freelance work, you have to declare yourself as self-employed. If you're doing something self-employed because you're doing something within your scope of practice, you have to make sure that you've got your indemnity. You just have to add a little extra premium to your insurance, which we all have to pay into, as you know, when we register. We all have to pay that to get cover for lawyers, etc. That's our professional payment. We do it through the British Association for Occupational Therapists, but it would be different for, if it's CSP, I think it is for physiotherapy. You pay your fee for your profession to support you should you go before a panel. Okay, and it's just the same thing. It's an insurance, it's an indemnity insurance. All students have got some insurance through the university because there's a contract between the university and yourselves. And that contract is where there is this agreement that students must behave in a professional manner. If they don't, then the university will deal with it. I hope that addresses that question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So it's really, to recap, that it is project-based. So there isn't expectations of hands-on or doing skills that makes you think, oh, what could go wrong? Because students will be allocated with agreement between all the parties and the university and the service on board to say, like, what is the actual project they're going to do, and how is it going to take it from the shift of idea to actual applications and demonstrating evaluation. And that project base is all reviewed and followed through these long arm supervision and the HNY's educators in the back, the academic follow-up within the service. So it isn't really touch-based clinical input that is expected to say, oh, something has gone wrong, or they, you know, and it's actually the placements. It's not suggested that these are a pair of hands to support service users, as we're maybe going beyond the boundaries of their professional contact, you know. So that's really good. I'm interested to really understand from long arm supervisors. You said role emerging placement usually students are allocated in pairs because acknowledging how much peer learning is essential in the you know, the journey itself, and bouncing ideas and reflecting on each other. What would happen if the two students don't get along?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I was going to say, I smile sweetly because it's the same as any placement. You know, if you put two students together, they might not always get on. But as an HEI, we match the students very carefully, and we look at, you know, the students express a wish to go in certain areas of placement. So we look at who wants to go where. We also look at compatibility as well. We don't know all the students really well, but by the time they come on the role emerging placements, then we match them to the best of our ability. And if there is a problem on placement, I think we face it head on, you know, and try and work it through as you would any other issue in a workplace. You know, if there were two students in a traditional placement who didn't get on, you'd sit down and try and work through. So it's not really any different. It's about compatibility. We try and work very hard on that.
Thank you. So the current professionals are working in organizations where there's roles, and they're supporting roles that in organization that there isn't any role in there. What would make this as an organization appealing to allow their professions to offer these long arm supervision? What would these organizations see it as an opportunity of? What? You know, what would make them? What's the benefit for them as an organization? Say, oh, I've got 10 OTs in this acute ward. Why should I allow, you know, these OTs to offer long arm supervision outside these organizations? What would you say around that? Because I mean, I know that sometimes organizations have some clinical staff and non-clinical. What's your take on that?
So just doing some research at the moment, which is actually interviewing occupational therapists who have supervised students on placement, saying what's in it for you, what do you get out of it, what do you think to the models, what have you benefited, etc. What we found is that the evidence suggests that many professionals, often your head's down, it's like firefighting. It's literally like just dealing with one almost exhausting problem after another, and then never really getting chance to put their heads up and see what's happening in their own profession, see about and hear about the new innovations, understand a little bit about what's going on. And ultimately, what can often happen is people can almost, because you're firefighting all the time, you become burnt out. If the organization actually can allow people to have some time, this is what the educators are saying, every professional has got to provide supervision. Now, what happens is with the long arm supervision is you are offering supervision to students, but you're offering opportunities to students, 2 or 3 students, not just 1. Also, those hours, they're under contract to provide supervision. So, for example, if you're working in a CUPE setting within a trust somewhere, you get the opportunity to fulfill your teaching, if you like, your educators' hours by providing role emerging placement supervision, because it's still acting on behalf of the contract between the university and the placement providers. And so the university is paying your setting or paying the trust for a percentage of hours of your time. So it's exactly the same. They're getting that monetary benefit, but also they're giving you the opportunity to have a look around and see what's actually happening in your own profession elsewhere, and to actually do some work that sometimes means you can actually see how you can link with the social prescribing. So one example was that a supervisor from an acute stroke team, occupational therapist from a stroke team, was supervising 2 occupational therapy students in an arts-based charity. And what they did was they made links between the occupational therapists who were working in the stroke team and the arts-based charity as a way of doing something that would be therapeutic, that would help these people who are on discharge to have a kind of peer support using art to continue some rehabilitation of particularly their upper limb. And so they're actually able to link and create an extension of some of the therapy that they were doing. So it didn't just be something that was different to what they're doing anymore. They actually were allowed to continue some therapy via the charity, even if it was through the medium of art, so that people were using their hands and using dexterity, holding the brushes, etc. And this basically was just one small example of where people can get benefit. Also, a lot of people who are supervisors are senior managers or senior trained staff who don't get the chance to have many students because they're the ones managing others. And so we find an awful lot of the ones who come forward to be long arm supervisors are managers themselves, and they miss that clinical touch, they miss that therapeutic input, if you like, they miss it, and yet they want to draw on their service development skills. So we've actually found a lot of managers being quite excited and come back every single year to be a long arm supervisor without fail. They say it's almost like their therapy away from the day job. So and they love the way that the students shine with such innovative ideas, and it helps them to go back with their innovations that the students have taught them, which is what I was saying about my day job's been enhanced. The students are always teaching me something new, and that's enhancing me, keeping me relevant, keeping me contemporary. So I think that there's I mustn't ever say what I think the research is going to say, because I don't know, because I've got someone to do the interviews, I'm not doing them. But basically those, they're going to be interviewed, it'll be them, but that's the anecdotal evidence, and that's the evidence that I've got so far.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, that you keep up to date, with what's going on. So like seniority goes up and you're managing, but then you keep up to date with the recent generation of what the profession's bringing. So just really, it's interesting to see that they're more appetite to have from a manager's point of view, and enables the service development that they don't have time even to think about. The students will do it for you, with all of this massive evidence-based latest. I'm waiting for any questions, but I've got another one until anybody raise their hand, or you've got your mics enabled now and camera. Feel free to come in. So is it true that the long arm supervisors are actually more seniors educator, because it does require a slightly different approach to the traditional supervision? And does it require more training to become a long arm supervisor? Can you elaborate on this? So like if I'm an educator, but usually to the traditional, what would makes me applicable to apply for, to offer my service as a long arm supervisor?
Well, what I would suggest is that everybody who's involved in educating students have to go on a slip course, or they have to go on an educator's course anyway. And that means that some people may well be qualified for at least a year or more. But ultimately, for role emerging placements, you don't have to be super experienced in your area, because you're not teaching the students in your area. You're doing long arm supervision. So certainly my experience has been, we've had people who've got, as soon as they've gone through the educator's course, they're offering role emerging placement. And sometimes actually that's because they've had a role emerging placement themselves. And so actually they're even better, prepared to be able to supervise. So someone like Emma, within a year of her practice, she was supervising students on a placement, long arm supervision. So that gives you an example of what it's like. Ultimately, I would say that for the extra training is that certainly if it's with ourselves, myself and Fiona at York St John, you would get absolutely clear, de facto, totally clear training and a manual to help you, to support you as well. And you have access to us at the university should there be any queries whatsoever. We're very hands-on, myself and Fiona, and we're very much there to sort of help people feel confident in their roles, because we want this to be a tremendous success for everybody concerned. And so there is a full training provided.
We've got a question.
Fiona, you can answer that.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it depends which organisation. So the question is, what happens with the student tariff money? Does this go to the supervisor's organisation, the organisation where the student's based, or split between the two? So it's 80-20 split. So if it's a charitable organisation, the charity get 80% of the tariff and 20% goes to the long arm supervisor. So whether or not you choose to have that privately or whether it goes into your organisation is between you and the organisation you work for. Does that help, Sarah?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Fiona.
Yeah. Any more?
I think that brings us nicely to the motion that we're having in Humber, North Yorkshire. We're thinking of actually building our bank of long arm supervision under the umbrella of ICB. So this is the integrated partnership and system. So we are in negotiation now about really how can we build our bank of long arm supervision across all the discipline. So any role emerging placement coming in, you have a bank to choose, to select who is more appropriate, who is more interested in these areas, because it needs to link with our registered staff. It needs to really link with your interest as well in the areas that you're offering supervision in. And that matching is a brilliant to happen between the long arm supervisor, the student, and the organization in the areas that they're all liking to work on. So this is a motion that is happening, and it's just really great time to think about. If you are interested, we're going to send now 3 polls on, and then registration. It's just a really quick 20 seconds registration form if you want to be part of this motion around enabling this bank of long arm supervision to supervisors bank to shape within this region. And that will also include if you are to consider offering long arm supervision outside your contract of you're working at. So it gives you like, oh, if it is about an hour supervision and I'm really interested to develop a profession, I'm really interested in helping the new generation and expanding our profession, and I offer that beyond my working hours, couple of hours, and making sure that I'm in contact, that there's a process for that. So this is what we're really our ambition to do. And like we said, this is the starting of the journey. So with coming on board with the journey, things will be clearer, the process will be clearer, the training of the long arm supervision will be clearer. It's just, we want you to get on the journey. So we're not expecting that you're ready to offer long arm supervision tomorrow, because I really need, as a registered staff, I feel like, oh, I'd like to know what kind of more project, what kind of tools they use, and maybe enhance my leadership, and a lot of things that we need to really be up to feel like we're up to it, but it's just really an interest in starting to be on board with the journey. And if you do, so I'm just going to share this slide and just use your mobile phone to scan this, and it just takes you to a form, and I will also copy it into the chat if you like the link to invite you to fill this form. It takes you 20 seconds because all we need is your name, your profession, where are you, and your email, just so we can connect with you to be on this journey. And you know, be part of when we talk about the Bank of Long Arm Supervision, say, oh, I took initiative in that and I was on board with that in this region.
Certainly are. Just send an email. I'm always keen to do any promotional stuff you like to do about role emerging. So if someone in your organisation would like us to, you know, pop in and have a chat about, or get your staff on board with something, that's always the best way to do it. You can always pop into a MS Teams and do a little bit of a, come on, you know, this is going to be good for your organisation. So.
And I've read recently one paper or a couple of papers from nursing because of the triple SA suggesting that there need to be registered staff for supervising and even mentoring on site. There's two universities who took the initiative with long arm supervision style, and they're opening the placement all far beyond what the expectation of offering long arm supervision. So the students are not left without supervision, but they're offered long arm supervision instead of being on site. And that just opened up the opportunities immensely. And it's just interesting to see, like, oh, it just really need a little bit of appetite of, I don't call it a risk, it's appetite of thinking out of the box, isn't it? So the regulations are not there to stop us from thinking. It's just to ensure that we have a qualitative approach of offering and making sure that we're safe in the practice.
Indeed. So, right, I think that's
yeah,
that's all the questions. So
thank you very much, and thank you very much everybody who attended the webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for arranging it all, Hanan. It's brilliant.
Thank you.